Here are the recommended tools to do this shifter installation. We have the large snap ring pliers to do the large snap ring on the center of the base. We have small snap ring pliers to do the snap ring on the shaft for the reverse spring. We have a magnetic base which will help us find the angles for aligning the shifter. This is not required, but it will help you do a better job of installing the shifter properly, which is very critical. We have a 10mm socket, a T25 Torx, a 6mm socket, hex type for the Allen bolts down inside the shift linkage. And these are some extensions that we use: a 1/4" drive extension with a 1/4" drive ratchet and a 3/8 drive ratchet with a 3/8 drive extension. Obviously you don't need an extension this long. We have found it makes it a lot easier though when you are running a longer extension. We are now ready to begin the installation of the JHM solid short throw shifter. First off, we got to remove the stock shifter or the current aftermarket shifter you have now. Real simple. We just undo the ball here. It spins right off. The boot comes up. You just kind of grab it. It pops up. First bolts you need to undo are right here for the dust shield. They're 10mm. We have a rather long extension we use, but it just aids us in getting to it. You're not required to have such a long extension. Little side note, you'll notice with the shifter in the car how much slop there is in this ball. There's a lot up and down. See how sloppy this is. Okay, the next thing we need to undo are the Allen bolts here and down here for the linkage. Be very careful you don't drop these. Sometimes it helps to put your fingers down there with the socket when you're ready to pull it out. To the main shift rod. Next step, we need to lower the box assembly in the car in order to get to the T25 Torx that hold the actual black shifter into the box. So there's one here and here, right out of your sight. Maybe a little insulation in the way. I've already removed one of them, so right here I'm only removing one nut. Here's the one nut I removed. There's two more up here. It's easier if you undo the back nuts here first. You can get into these front ones a little easier. You may be able to avoid having to use some kind of wobbly socket. If you can't get into it with a straight socket and ratchet like this, you might have to use a wobbly socket or an open end for these two 10mm. Okay, now we have access to the T25 down further inside. So we'll grab our T25 socket. Now you'll be able to push this whole assembly down in the car, as you can see. There's 4 bolts for this. Usually easiest to get one of the rearmost ones first. Be very careful with these bolts as well. They're easily dropped. Remove it like that. And there's 2 up front. The front ones are harder to grab onto. You may want to pull them out when you pull the shifter out of the car. One thing you will notice about the bolt right in here is that you've got to kind of twist the whole assembly to get a good access to it. Otherwise your shaft may hit the metal too much right there. I have those loose. And let's see if I can grab them now. Use two hands, the best way to do it. There's the third one. And the fourth one. Now it's a little tricky to get this out of here. You got to slide it pretty far back. You can see the shift rod right here and the base. You got to push it pretty far back to get it going, and then you just kind of work it out. So now the shifter is out of the car. One thing you want to check while it's out of the car is this rod right here. This is the rod that attaches the shifter to the transmission and makes it move with it. You want to grab it and see if there's side-to-side movement, moving front to back. If there is, you should look into our Delrin bushing we have for that and contact us. We can supply that. The factory one's pretty tight assembly. We do have an upgrade though. It is Delrin, so contact us regarding that if this shaft can go in and out too much. It will make your shifting worse. Now that we have the shifter assembly out of the car, I'm now going to start with the disassembly of the factory shifter. First thing you want to do is undo this external snap ring up here where the spring is located. You may want to hold on to this a little bit when you remove the snap ring because you may shoot off and you do not want that. Once the snap ring's off, the shaft easily slips out. Put that to the side. The last major chore is to pop the large snap ring out. We will retain this piece for use with our kit. Everything else can be discarded. This just slips right out. Be set to the side. While this is apart, we can replace these bushings here with the supplied Delrin also. When you receive your JHM solid short throw shifter, you'll come in a box like this. In the package you will find a tube of grease, 2 Delrin bushings. If you notice, they're cut in half and they come with supplied snap rings. You got to be very careful to make sure that the two halves stay together. They need to be kept as a unit because they are cut together. And then a package full of shims. Pull the shifter out of the box. Got to remove the bubble wrap. And you will find that the shifter is fully assembled. To begin with the actual assembly, it's going to be easier to switch out the rubber bushings with our Delrin bushings when the shifter assembly is out of the base. How this is done, you actually got to go ahead and wiggle these out. You got to pull pretty hard and wiggle. Sometimes the bushing will stay with the piece, sometimes it'll stay with the rod. Bushing can be discarded. You now need to get out one of the Delrin bushings and snap ring. On a side note, it's easier to do one side at a time so you don't get anything mixed up or put these rods in backwards. You have a reference by looking at the other rod. So for the assembly, we're going to take our tube of grease, hold one half of the Delrin bushing, put some grease in it, take the other half of the Delrin bushing, some grease in it. What you need to do next is you sandwich these bushings over the shaft with the shouldered end near here. To squeeze them together. It's going to get a little messy, but it's good. We want to make sure these are plenty lubricated. Then slide everything into the base. At this point, we take our snap ring, We need to snap it into the grooves in order to keep the Delrin bushing in place. Now that we have the snap ring neatly installed, we are done with this one side. The shaft should be sliding easily. Make sure there's plenty of lubrication. Then move on to the other side. Now that we have finished assembling and installing our Delrin bushings into the base, we will now install the shaft. Our shaft assembly will come fully assembled. All you need to do is insert it into the base. Before you doing so, you need to put some grease, especially on this notch, because this is what it rides on to grab reverse. You may also want to put some grease down here near the base. Just kind of rub it inside the joints. Work it in a little bit. That should do it. Now here's the tricky part. You need to get this through the base. You can do it if you take your time and angle it properly. Worst case, you may have to remove the bottom pivot piece, the bolt right here, to get it through. But if you take your time and you twist it sideways like this, it will go through. Next task, just snap this into place, our aluminum base. Just drops right in. Now that that is in, we need to snap this down with a snap ring. We don't just snap the snap ring in, we actually supply some shims. The reason we supply shims is this is a precision fit piece. So we've machined it to basically use one shim. There's the thick shim in here, 1 millimeter thick. That is the shim you should use. There are 4 thicknesses though. This is just in case that the tolerances of your base are different than the ones we have installed this into so far. We just have taken this into account, being that this is a precision piece. So you drop the thick one in here. Before you stick it in there, you want to make sure that the aluminum base is seated fully at the bottom with the plastic and is flush. So now that we got our shim in there, we just install the snap ring. This is where the other shims come into play. If you put the snap ring in and you can't get it in at all, that means we need to run thinner shims. You want it shim just right where it's a very tight fit and the base will not move inside of the plastic unit. Now the assembly is ready to be installed into the car. A little side note on these shims. It should work fine with the thickest shim. However, if it's too tight and you cannot get the thick shim in there, there are thinner shims. Try to use as many as you can, making it as tight as possible. If you run our thick shim and it's loose, then you want to add some of these on top of it. The bottom line is you need to adjust this so it's a really tight fit on the snap ring and the snap ring barely goes in. This will help retain the features of the JHM solid short throw. We are now ready to assemble in the car the shifter we did originally on the bench, ready to drop in. It's a little tricky once again to kind of wiggle this in here, get the rods out of the way. You're going to find that the bottom base piece is going to want to catch up. There we go, we got it down. Next thing you want to do is you need to push down on this assembly and back in order to get the front slid into place right here, back onto the rod. Next step is to get the Torx bolts back between the rods and the base. So again, I'll help hold it, ease it into place. Start with the front right. What you want to do on the first 3 is you don't want to fully tighten them. You want to get them started about 3/4 of the way. We'll do the front left last. It tends to be the hardest to get to. Just do the right rear. Drop it in. This one can be fully tightened since the front one on that side is already in. You can go ahead and then tighten the front of that. Just want to make sure both are in before tightening them on any given shaft. Now drop in the third one. Rear left. Okay, don't tighten that all the way. Now we're going to go with the front left. Once again, this one's not as easy to get to. You want to push everything over to the side. Tighten that last one. Now before bolting the box back up into the car, we need to get the shift rods attached. The one you're going to want to get first is the bottom one that actually does your shifting. You may have to push it out of the way, get it in place. There we go. We got to grab the other shaft in the car, put it on top. You'll be able to see if you look closely down here, right down there. It's where we need to insert the other bolt. This is the assembly we need to enter in there. It's easiest to set it in place first. Be careful, make sure you don't knock it over. Set it on top, then you want to take your wrench here. See if we can start it by hand. That time we got it. It went easy. Sometimes you have to move the shaft a little bit, play with a little bit to get it right. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just tighten this one up. We'll snug it, but then we're going to go ahead and back it off just enough so it can still move and not engage the shaft fully. Next is the stabilizer bolt for the stabilizer shaft. On this one, when you put it back in, all you got to do is make sure that the bolt is centered up on the slot. If you do that, we have not had a problem with the adjustment. Just make sure the bolt's on center with the slot. Now that we have finished tightening the bolts from the shift rods to the shifter, here and here, you can see this one's on center, and this one just tight enough where it still allows it to move independent of the shaft, sideways and forwards and backwards. That way we can adjust it when the time comes. I will now move into tightening the box up back into the vehicle. The box sometimes may not line up too easily with the studs. You might have to reach in and slide it forward and backwards. Once again, there's 4 10mm nuts. Get them started. Take our 10mm socket and extension. Now I got the nuts hand tightened, I'm going to go ahead and get my 10mm socket and extension. 1/4" drive ratchet is what comes in handy here. Like I said before, you want to tighten the ones up here first. You usually can get a good angle on them without having to get a wobbly socket when the back side down here is loose. Otherwise you can use an open end or, like I said, a wobbly socket. Now that all four are tight, all we have left is the adjustment of the shifter. What's recommended is a 3-degree tilt to the right and a 7-degree tilt back. We have this fancy tool here. They're not too expensive. You can do it by feel, but we highly recommend you use this to help set it up. So what you got to do is you got to have it just loose enough where you can still move it. You got to have 3 to the right, about 7 back. Maybe it requires some trial and error to, give it a shot, see how it feels. Make sure you're not going to ruin your shifter base or have it out of adjustment. So I'm going to tighten this down and I'm going to feel it out. What we'll do is we'll go over to the left and we'll feel where it hits before reverse. We'll put it in first gear. There's reverse. Looks like all our gears are there. If all your gears are there and nothing's hitting, you're in good shape. That's all that's required. If you have trouble and you don't have a base, you can go off of the feel for reverse. What you'll do is you'll feel it touch the little stop, and you'll put it into second, and you should have some play, but not too little play. Similar play to what you have in 4th gear. So that's what you're looking for. If you do not have the tilt wheel to tell you if you got 7 back, 3 to the right. All we have left is the dust shield. Slip it back in place. 2 10mm nuts. One side note before you reinstall your boot, you're going to want to turn it inside out. And if you see, mine is already cut. I've cut mine all the way down. You may need to cut it halfway, whatever. It's going to normally stick out that far. What it needs to do is it needs to clear the hitting this. So you can cut it down a bunch, get it till it fits right, because obviously the better fit you get, the higher the boot will sit closer to your knob. But do not forget to cut this down. Slide this in, line up the boot, tap it into place. Tighten your knob. That's it. Please feel free to email us or call us with any questions.